Iron Monkey presents the Lazaretto Letters, a found collection of unmailed, handwritten letters from 1922. Episode 5, Nurse Mary. Today's letters are from Mary Talieri and Madame Iannuzzi. Letter 1. Today's first letter is from Mary Talieri, addressed to Father Roberto Botticelli, Wilmington, Delaware, stamped, sealed, and unpostmarked. Monday, May 29th, 1922. Dear Father Roberto, I am penning you a short note to extend my heartfelt gratitude for the wonderful Mass last Sunday. Though I have encountered the parable of the prodigal son on numerous occasions, its message remained elusive until you explained it so clearly. I now understand that the lesson is about forgiveness. Just as a father will forgive his son, so too will God the Father forgive his children, even if they have lived a sinful life. In truth, since my tender years, I confess I misunderstood the parable. It never seemed fair to me that the irresponsible son was celebrated, whilst the faithful, dutiful brother went unrewarded. However, I now grasp its true meaning and wonderful message. I also wanted to ask you about Madame Iannuzzi, the fortune teller from the carnival. Do you know her? She has been conducting séances here in our residence for my fellow nurses, and it has become a regular occurrence. Some of them have been pressing me to attend, but I always turn them down. I tell them that the church forbids it, though I must confess, I am simply too fearful. Well, I formally made the madam's acquaintance this morning after breakfast, and I must confess that she was very sweet indeed. We had a nice chat, and she was an absolute dear. I believe she puts on her enigmatic act for the séance, but face to face, she was very pleasant and approachable. She asked me to attend a small, informal session this evening. I told her that it was forbidden, but she explained that she too is Catholic, and that the Church allows investigation and scientific inquiry of psychic phenomena. She assured me that all her séances begin with prayer, and are often quite jolly. Normally, I would seek your approval to attend a séance, but as I shall not see you for another week or two, I shall have to place my trust in the madam. I believe I can. Hopefully it is the right decision, as I plan to attend, unless I lose my nerve. I'll send you another note afterwards to let you know how it went. Yours faithfully, Mary Talieri. Letter 2. Written by Mary Talieri, addressed to Father Roberto Botticelli, Wilmington, Delaware, stamped, sealed, and unpostmarked. Tuesday, May 30th, 1922. Dear Father, well, I attended a séance last night, and it was certainly interesting. It began as promised with a sign of the cross, an Our Father, and a prayer for all of us to be kept safe. She then instructed us to switch off the lights and light a single candle. She had us all take deep breaths and place our hands upon the table, each holding the hands of those seated beside us. She spoke for a while about the spirit world and how she intended to open a portal to the other side and speak to the dead. Some of the girls were giggling nervously. I may have been as well, though quite honestly, I was terribly frightened and on edge. She then began to recite an incantation, Anime perdute ascoltateci. She then instructed us to repeat this again and again. As we did, she continued with the full incantation. I would not say this put us into a trance, but it focused our thoughts as we chanted in unison. My nerves had just begun to calm when a rumbling seemed to come from beneath the table. It startled us, but the unflinching Madame Iannuzzi sternly told us to continue. Anime perdute ascoltateci. Anime perdute ascoltateci. As we recited the verse again and again, I found myself gazing into the corner of the room. Though instructed to keep our eyes closed, I was puzzled by what I thought I saw, but could not help but stare. there appeared to be a dark figure standing there. At first, it appeared as a shadowy dark mass, but the longer I stared, the more it seemed to narrow into a human form. It was not solid, though. It looked more like the cast shadow of an invisible man. I glanced over to the opposing corner for comparison, and it appeared how it should, dark and formless. When I looked back, the shape appeared to be more refined. I then became aware that I was completely unafraid. Perhaps it was the company of my friends, or maybe the calming effect of the chanting. At some point, I stopped uttering the words. The sound of their voices seemed to fade away like a dream, distant and unreal, as though their words came from some faraway land. When I looked back to the corner, the figure was still there and even more distinct than before. It appeared to be in the shape of a tall, thin man, though I could not discern any detail of its countenance. I strained my eyes to see more clearly, and just then it seemed to move only slightly, as if quivering in the flicker of the candlelight. I happened to notice a tiny light emanating from the top of the flickering shadow form. I thought it must be a hole in the wall with a beam shining through from the other side, but I dismissed this notion, for it was an outside wall, and it was quite dark outside. The light came and went at random, and sometimes appeared to point in different directions. It reminded me of a small lighthouse. The beam appeared to spring from the top of the form, like the lamp of a coal miner. It seemed fitting somehow, for a miner too would appear blackened, his face hidden beneath a mask of soot. In one very small but distinct motion, it began to move toward me. It was as though the shadow had peeled itself from the wall and into the room. Startled and intrigued, but still unafraid, I watched it creep slowly nearer. I squinted, striving to discern any detail, but failed to do so. One thing I noticed, the beam grew brighter and larger as it advanced. I could not help but stare at the light as it began to scintillate sparks of beautiful bright colors. I did not feel the need to turn away, as it did not hurt my eyes like it would looking into the sun. On the contrary, the light seemed somehow friendly and inviting. I just wanted to be enveloped by it as it filled the room like a warm, loving embrace. My friends and the contents of the room seemed to slip away. The voices of the ladies were barely heard and distant, like an old memory. All my fears and worries vanished as I fell into a kind of ecstasy. I do not know how long it lasted, but the next thing I knew, the light was gone, and I was surrounded by my giggling friends and Madame Iannuzzi. I didn't know how to explain what I experienced, so I told them that I must have fallen asleep. Father, this was the most singular and profound spiritual event I have ever experienced. I'd like to say it was a visitation from an angel or from the Holy Spirit, but I didn't feel there was any message other than love. Do you believe this may have been a calling? I have considered entering the sisterhood in the past, but never in earnest until now. I should very much like to speak with you about it upon your return. Yours faithfully, Mary Taglieri. Letter 3, written by Maddalena Iannuzzi, addressed to Thomasina Crodasco, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, stamped, sealed, and unpostmarked. Tuesday, May 30th, 1922. My dear Mina, ever since last night's memorable séance with Mary, my mind has been racing with thoughts of how I might use her abilities to enhance my show. Yet, as the night wore on, doubts began to trouble me. Was last night merely a fluke? Was it truly Mary that caused the manifestations? I cannot wholly explain what occurred. I can explain what I saw, but I don't understand what it was. It may have been an omen or prophecy. Perhaps the cloud was a spirit or a deity. I cannot say for certain. For that matter, Would she be willing to continue working with me or even speak to me again? Thankfully, that doubt faded when she approached me this morning and asked when we could have another session. Apparently, her perspective of the events were quite different. Who would have thought? I didn't question her, nor did I share what we saw with our own eyes. The last thing I want to do is scare her off. What I do want is to verify that she is indeed a medium, and if so, what power she may possess. Mary agreed to a personal session tonight, and my plan is to give her a series of simple spiritual tests. It's not a matter of trust. I know what I saw. There was no trickery in that cloud of blood she created last night. I just want to see what she is capable of. I'll put down my pen for now and gather a few things for tonight's sitting. I have a hunch this one might be the real McCoy. I'll let you know how it turns out. Love, Lena. Letter 4, written by Maddalena Iannuzzi, addressed to Thomasina Cordasco, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, stamped, sealed, and unpostmarked. Wednesday, May 31st, 1922. Dearest Mina, I have another zinger of a letter for you. Last night, I met with Mary as planned. I'd prepared a few tests to see how keen her sensitivity might be. These were presented under the guise that we were testing the strength and nature of the spirits among us. She agreed and seemed far more at ease than our previous sitting. I began with prayer and invocations to set the proper mood for spiritual activity. Mary complied and seemed very much at ease. The first test I began was the candle test. It works well even when there is little spiritual movement in the room. It's also the easiest to cheat. Even the least skeptic can see how it's done by blowing softly through partly open lips. I'm quite the expert myself, and candles have long been one of my favorite cheats. An effective one is to simply drill a small hole in the candle and insert the tip of a match. Fill in the hole with wax, smooth it over, and you would never know it was there. It's quite the show when the candle burns down and the match tip catches, causing the flame to shoot up for an instant, especially in a room lit solely by that one light. Another deception is to bore a hole straight through the wick further down the candle. When the flame reaches the gap, it will extinguish itself. Makes a fine finale for the night. Best part is, if I want a 45-minute sitting, the candle gives me one. I have a whole set prepared, each one timed to the sort of scene I want to play. Not that I suspected Mary of any trickery, but I don't trust anyone in this game. I make fools, not the other way around. In this case, I used candles straight from the box for our test. Even without deception, they're remarkably useful for stirring up responses from the dead. The spirits seem to draw upon the energy of the flame, for they're touchy little devils, and as it's so delicate, it doesn't take much to see a bit of movement. I placed a lit candle before each of us, and we fixed our eyes upon the flame, asking any spirits present to indicate their presence by agitating the flame in response to our questions. After a few questions, we began to see some action. The flame wavered, as though touched by an unseen hand. I kept one eye on Mary's mouth, just to be sure there were no shenanigans. Then, when I asked the presence to make itself known, the candle flared up with a few bright sparks, almost exactly like one of my own tricks. That gave me pause. For a moment, I thought I must have taken the wrong candle from my set. I began to second-guess myself, which is never a good look in this line of work. Losing focus, I decided to move on to the next test, automatic writing. This is the exercise in which the participant enters a trance state, allowing the spirits to guide the hand and write their messages upon paper. I provided a pencil and paper and instructed her to let her hand flow freely, to let go, not to think and not to force it. Let the spirits do the work, I told her. Don't attempt to write or draw anything. Just let the spirits flow through you and allow them to express themselves. Since this practice is usually performed by an experienced medium, I asked Mary to wear a blindfold so she wouldn't fix her mind on what she was writing. I asked her to begin by drawing circles and to let her hand move as it would. Unfortunately, that was all she did, circles one after another. I tore a few pages from the pad for later review, but every one of them was the same, nothing but circles. I encouraged her to relax into it and try other forms, but that only led to a few shaky lines and crude shapes. Page after page of this, and it was clear we were getting nowhere. To tell the truth, I was growing bored and a bit cross with the monotony, so we ended it and moved on to the next test. I then explained to Mary that we would be attempting a few psychometric readings. In this practice, the subject is handed an article which she does not know, and she strives to gain some sense of its history or of the person to whom it once belonged. First, I had Mary put on a blindfold and recite a few simple incantations. It helps one to rely less on sight and more on what I like to call an object's soul memory. I had chosen a few personal effects that once belonged to my old friend Angelo, who was killed in the war. First, I took a pen, wrapped it in a silk handkerchief, and placed it in her hands. She held it for a moment, then said softly, "This is your pen." I asked her who was the previous owner, and she simply repeated that it was my pen. Next, I handed her a St. Christopher medallion. Mary turned it over slowly between her fingers and gave no reply to any question I asked. Instead, she began to weep, at first quietly. I could tell it would grow worse, so I took the medallion back, and the tears ceased at once. Lastly, I took Angelo's watch, wrapped it in silk, and placed it between her hands. I began to ask if she sensed anything, but before even touching it, she blurted out, "It's a watch." The answer startled me, yet, as with the pen, she refused to elaborate and only repeated the words. I must admit, I was rather frustrated by that point. True, she had named the object, but perhaps she'd simply heard the ticking. I began to doubt there was anything remarkable about her after all. So we moved on to the final test, scrying. Scrying, simply put, is the act of gazing into a reflective surface in hopes of seeing visions. I set my own blackened mirror before her and told her to rest her eyes. "Don't stare too deeply," I said. "Just soften your gaze and look through it. Tell me what you see, if anything." Nothing. She sat there motionless, staring into the glass for what felt like an eternity. I caught myself shaking my head in frustration and decided it best to end the tests. I rose, walked around the table, and was about to take the mirror away when I noticed its reflection. Instead of Mary's face, I saw only a dark shape. Perplexed, I brought the candle nearer, and the image grew clearer. It was Mary, yes, but her eyes were closed, and her face was dark as coal, blacker than black, with a faint tinge of red. Then she opened her eyes and mouth with a wild, unnatural smile, showing blood-stained teeth and bright, bloodshot eyes. It was Mary, yet not Mary. My first thought was she was communing with a demon, or worse, that she was under some dreadful influence. I was quite taken aback, though I managed to keep my composure. I drew a slow breath and asked, "Who am I speaking to?" Her eyes darted and met mine in the mirror, and then everything went dark. The candle had gone out. I struck a match and brought the light back, and in its glow sat Mary, her face serene and smiling, her reflection just the same. The trance was broken, and whatever had been there was gone. The moment was lost. I concluded the sitting and thanked her. Once again, Mary seemed wholly untroubled by what had happened. If anything, she appeared slightly disappointed, yet said she looked forward to our next séance. I pondered the evening. It was mostly uneventful, yet that final vision in the mirror was both fascinating and deeply unsettling. I'm pleased she's agreed to meet again, though I'll need to reconsider my approach before our next sitting. If you have any thoughts on how I might proceed, I'd be glad to hear them. Love, Lena. P.S. After finishing this letter, I stayed behind to straighten the room. When I tore away the top sheet from the pad we had used for the automatic writing, I noticed something in the flicker of the candlelight. Impressions pressed into the paper beneath. I turned it around and a message became clear. It read, Ti vedo strega. Ti vedo strega translates to, I see you, witch. The Lazaretto Letters, a found collection of unmailed, handwritten letters from 1922. Produced and distributed by Iron Monkey. To share your reflections, lend your aid, or explore the mysteries of the Lazaretto Letters, visit Iron Monkey at enterthemonkey.com. Thank you for listening.